My servants are mine to command, not for the likes of you. Controlled and disdained, the voice spoke again. But enough of that. There is a little matter of some urgency we need to discuss. A weak pale light began to dispel the darkness, revealing a woman. It was completely covered in robes and gloves, the color of congealed blood. Only her face was visible. She had a cruel beauty with sharp and defined features, a bluish cast to her skin and hair that reached to her waist, as glossy of a raven's wing. A teardrop tattoo marked each cheek, and her silver eyes demanded my attention. You cannot control me, I said. I am protected. You should know that. I have drawn you here, have I not? And you have brought my heart's desire with you. The woman raised her outstretched arm and beckoned to me. I know who you are, I replied. Lysandra, sorceress and murderer, and I won't give it to you. So you are smarter than I thought. No matter. Lysandra waved a hand, and a small Argonian female appeared at her elbow. Smoke Eyes retrieved the gem. I reached down and pulled a blade from my boot. It was imbued with a deadly toxin, and the Argonian's natural resistance would not save her. Smoke Eyes reached for the bottle, and I flicked the blade, separating the hand from the wrist in one smooth movement. Smoke Eyes shrieked and scrabbled on the floor for the hand, even as the poison crawled through her bloodstream. She tried to speak something about the other one, then died, reaching for her mistress, who kicked the body away like garbage. Is my friend alive? I demanded. That filth knew something. Tell me, or I'll kill you as well. Instead of a reply, I was picked up and thrown across the room by an unseen force. I was stunned and could do nothing, as something strong and foul-smelling dragged me away, and I thought I heard the click of a lock before I passed out. Meanwhile, Sonia was trapped between massive rustling blades that rose slowly and upward, then suddenly dropped, and she could see 3 more blades ahead. The body of a very large rat lay decaying in the path of the blade in front of her. There was a pattern to the rise and fall of the blade trap. It was just a matter of timing, and she made it through unscathed. Further along, she came to a small alcove, and found herself at one of the locked gates that prevented Ashen Rose's escape. Protruding from the wall was a large stone block. Sonia called out, but Rose was unable to hear above the moaning of the undead. As she tried to push the stone, it had begun to crumble and break away with age, and only barely moved, so she leaned back against the other wall and kicked hard, pushing the block flush with the wall. The metal gate began to slowly move downward to the floor. Pushing caution aside, Sonia rushed into the room, ready to grab Rose and get out of there. Green mist started to rise from the grate floor. Quickly, let's go! Talk later, she yelled. Sonia raced for the open gate with Rose close behind, but incredibly, the dread zombie was coming through it, followed by the robed figure she had seen earlier, only now its face was unblemished. She turned to Rose, but she had stopped running and was standing still, looking at a something she held in her hands, a black soul gem. The bottle had transformed. Rose held it outward from her body as though offering it to the creature at the door. Take it, Lysandra. It is freely given, Rose said quietly. The robed figure appeared to divide in 2, shifting its own dimension, and then it settled, but changed to the ruinous monster Sonia had seen before. It came forward, reaching for the soul gem. Rose opened her hands and dropped it, and it shattered into a million pieces. The trapped soul screamed its fury as it enveloped Lysandra, writhing and binding her to itself. Minutes later, all that remained was a dried human-like husk within blood-red robes. The dread zombie sunk to the floor, and the undead were quiet again. Sonia and Rose made it to the tomb entrance without incident. Wait, before we go, what was that about? Sonia asked. A story for another time, but I can say this, Rose replied. When I took the bottle from David's hands, it spoke to me. The soul within was the lover of Lysandra. Centuries ago, she was corrupted by the darker magics, and she trapped the soul of her lover in the gem so that he could not be unfaithful to her. I just wanted to give this soul the vengeance he deserved. Okay, then. Alright. Very interesting. The key to paradise. Queen Nakat, beautiful beyond the scope of a man's vision, she wanted to pass through the door to paradise, but the Guardian would not allow it. Only the offering of her head would open the way, but the castle, with the sealed doors, already had the gift. And crimson droplets fell, while the Guardian held closed the doors for all eternity. Alright, so as you can see, this is the book that I was dreading the most. Look at that. 35 pages. Alright, let's get started. Alright, the King's Axeman. Sit, my son, I'm going to tell you a story. Take your quill and parchment and make your scratchings if you must. I'm unable to make sense of it anyway. But your sons, if they even care, deserve to know what happened all those years ago. I've carried this load on my shoulders like a sack of grain for many years, and it's time to rid myself of the burden. I know you look at me and see a bitter old man with a filthy gray beard and a useless body, but I am ready to kneel before the Reaper when he calls, so he may take my head with his great scythe. I look around these walls and wonder why I was spared. Am I being punished? For what? For wielding the axe when my king demanded it? I might have preferred death to this pathetic existence in this lonely single room with only rats and cockroaches for company. They run over me when I sleep. Did you know that? They search amongst my blankets for the crumbs of bread that fall from my crippled hands before it even reaches my mouth. If they find none, they set about nibbling and biting, drawing blood, and I am too weak to brush them away. Have you ever eaten a cockroach? Don't speak. I will not hear again of pious priests and their empty promises of forgiveness. What have the gods done for me? You, my son, are all I have, and I can see the hate, and yes, pity, in your eyes. I beg you to listen, for your dead mother's sake. Do what you must with the parchments you write on, and then leave me. Death's icy breath touches my soul, and I shiver inside. I fear there's not much time left for me. I say that my giggling disturbs you, but I can't stop myself, and I think maybe I am afraid after all. This is a tale of a king, a land awash with blood, and the might of an infernal god. Take heed and be thankful you are not in my place. You already know that I was the king's executioner, his axeman, but not how and why. And if you think I have regrets about those days, well, you are wrong. It's what came after that is my burden. I remember clearly the feeling as my great axe would bite into the bared necks of my king's enemies, and the sound of the bloody head rolling away into the basket beneath the gore-soaked floor. I used to watch for the king's smile as the body lay twitching and bleeding. It meant my own head would stay in its place on my shoulders for a little longer, and not be laying in a pool of my own blood, staring at the sky with dead eyes. Let me tell you how I came into the employ of Stokan, the man many called the Savage King. He was known far and wide for his cruelty, and there was much opposition to his rule, but no one dared to challenge his right to the throne if they meant to keep breath in their lungs and my axe from their necks. I couldn't tell you who my father was, and my mother never spoke of him. I wonder if she knew. We lived in a run-down hovel in the poor part of Commoner's Row, close to the fishermen's boats, and the stench of rotting fish soaked into everything. Even the wooden planks of the huts, I had a sister and a younger brother. but I had no time for them. They were like ghosts to me. I used to roam the streets while my mother entertained the guards who were supposed to be watching for trouble in town, and I would be beaten black and blue if I came home before dark. Alright, sometimes if it rained, I would hide underneath one of the upturned boats and wait hungry and wet, hoping in vain. Hoping in vain there would be food on the table that night. One evening, I crept inside the doorway and I saw a small pouch on the floor almost hidden by a pile of clothes. It was dark inside and I could see a few coins spilling from the pouch. And as I reached for it, it grabbed me by the neck and I was shaken viciously the way a dog shakes a rat. I was thrown across the room and hit my head on the edge of the table and everything went black. I woke in a cell in the castle dungeons. My head was pounding and the sight was gone from my right eye. And that's why my eye looks like a milky glass marble, if you ever wondered. I could hear moans and screamings coming from the walls themselves, and I held my hands over my eyes to block the sound. I didn't notice the rattle of keys outside the door for the shrieking. And the next thing I knew, I was being dragged from the cell by my hair. I was thrown across the floor where I stopped at the feet of the King Stokan himself. He looked down at me with a sneer of distaste, and he was about to kick me away when he changed his mind. He must have seen the kinship of blood in me that day, because he put me to work in the dungeons, and it was 10 years before I saw sunlight again. Not that I cared. By that time, I had grown into a man with corded muscles, the strength of a forest bear, and the seeds of hatred in my heart. One day, the Keeper of Keys came to me carrying a huge axe and a black hooded robe, and he told me the king had dungeons. What? Oh, no, wait, didn't switch pages. That's fine. The king had named me his executioner. I now had no other name but the king's Axeman. Luck smiled on me that day for another reason, because I was to swear an oath of silence, and I only would save my tongue for the dagger if I kept my vow. Then again, I don't think it was luck, really, but more of test. Anyway, the first swing of the blade was the hardest, but it excited me, and after that, I relished every splash of blood that spurted over the killing floor. I remember the day the king came to the dungeons along with 3 men and a woman I had never seen before. There was to be a special execution. I had heard of these 4. They were the king's favorite generals. Swartan, Raisin, and Clothrin were all mean, hard-looking men, but it was the woman I would have feared most. There were rumors even here of her sadistic excesses. She carried a studded leather whip with glass splinters embedded in the lash. It was not meant for the victim to survive that punishment. Her name was Miriam, and she was wickedly beautiful. I couldn't help but stare when she wasn't looking, and once the king caught me, he smiled. But his eyes were like hot coals as he drew an imaginary blade across his throat. The execution went ahead as planned, and as usual, I never knew whose neck it was my axe bit into. But later, after the king had gone, there were grumblings among the guards. It seemed somebody important had displeased the king, and now they expected trouble. It didn't matter to me. I had done my job well. My axe glistened and dripped bright heart blood. I overheard many other rumors as the guards gossiped stories about the king and violent rages, which made him strike out at anyone near him. How women were dragged from the lower city brothels to entertain him and cool his temper, if only for a short time. Many times women were taken from the royal chambers in the morning and buried in unmarked graves, or were thrown to the jackals outside the city. I remember the time a young woman was thrown into one of the dungeon cells, and she remained there still scarred so badly that no man would ever look upon her again. The king took delight in her torture and visited from time to time to taunt and torment her. I wondered what she had done to be singled out for special treatment. Very few knew of the caverns below the dungeons, but I discovered them one evening when I heard voices, and following the sound led me to a tunnel blocked by an old wooden door. It was ajar, however, and by a dim light I saw King Stokan himself. And King Stokan and the four generals gathered around a table where a bloodied prisoner lay in a stupor. A mage in black robes was solemnly reciting from a book, but I'd never heard such words before. I listened out of sight as they spoke of pain and suffering and the various methods that could make it last longer without killing their captive. I was enthralled. The mage was bragging that she could summon demonic beings from the abyss, but I found it difficult to believe. At least I hoped it wasn't true. Demons and gods were not for a man to call. They were far beyond the doings of humankind. So the monks told us as children, but they spoke falsely as well. Many times after that, I heard screams and inhuman sounds coming from those caverns. Commoners and prisoners were dragged there and forced to endure unspeakable torments, and I was fascinated by what I saw when King Stokan enlisted me to get rid of the bodies. It was on one such occasion, when I was waiting to be called, that I heard a commotion coming from the stairs leading to the upper palace. A soldier covered in blood rolled over the balcony, followed by another who was fumbling down the staircase, screaming about revolution and murder. King Stokan, followed by the generals, quickly emerged from the tunnels, demanding to know what was happening. It seems there had been an uprising, and many of the palace guards had deserted their posts and joined the rebels, who were now searching for the king and his supporters. The royal court was decimated, and all of the king's servants and his favorite concubine had been slaughtered. The soldier was too weak to say more, and Stokan opened his throat with a dagger, pushed the body away before he was splashed with gore, then turned away and walked quickly back into the tunnels. The others followed, and I ran with them to the caverns. I pushed the heavy door shut and bolted it behind me. No one took much notice of me. The mage began reading aloud from the tome on the table, and the air began to shimmer as she recited passages in a strange guttural voice, and suddenly the room was shrouded in a darkness that felt like a living thing. It was hard to tell how long it lasted, but I felt as though I was spinning, and I thought my eardrums would explode with the pressure. I heard